Hi, everyone. You already know me. I'm Mark Truss from Wonderman Thompson, and I am here with.
I'm Belle Frank, Chief Strategy Officer from VML Y&R Health.
And we're glad to have you for this little mini lecture on what is a creative brief. So let's jump into it. The thing I like the most is one of these quotes on the front. A creative brief is the most sacred of all sacred ad documents, and truer words were never spoken.
It is to me.
So let's just walk through quickly. I know we go through this every lecture, but what is this certificate about? It's really a kind of a broad look at applying a modern consumer-centric approach to the development of marketing activities, identifying the goals and objectives and strategies relevant to that campaign, assessing the requirements that we need to deliver in this campaign, developing actionable insights and integrating that into the process of creating creative assets, and then evaluating the media choices, the media mix, the optimal plans, and of course, then measuring the effectiveness of the campaigns. As you know, this course is one of the electives, but builds on a lot of what you saw in Foundation and reinforces some of the things you've seen in the other courses. And this course specifically is about justifying the role of research throughout the creative development process, being able to come away and recommend research approaches to inform how you're going to do that, design and recommend a research plan, integrate insights to get to an impactful creative brief, which is what we're going to talk about today, recommend appropriate research tools and frameworks to optimize those creative assets, create a story-driven analysis of research insights, and lead an effective conversation and briefing meetings with multiple stakeholders, because it's not just, as you've learned, you in a room with a strategist. There's a lot of stakeholders for this. So in this module, there are actually two lectures: what is a creative brief, and research methods to help inform a creative brief. So let's talk about what is a creative brief. Belle.
I guess you don't want me to say it's what I spend most of my life doing.
No, that's good.
Rather, let me just talk about the document. So interestingly, it's way more than simply a document. It's an inspirational document. The idea is to take all of the marketing activity, all the communications objectives, the insights, what we've learned, and come up with a blueprint so that a campaign has a purpose and the campaign delivers against the expectations set in those objectives. And honestly, it can't simply be a list of requirements. What it has to be is a way to help make great work. And I know this course focuses a lot on the process and the steps you're going to go through, and you cannot deny that those are real. So the marketer is going to start by talking to the agency about what he or she wants to do. The strategist and researchers are going to figure out all of the insights, all of the intelligence that is needed to come up with the best idea. Where are the gaps? What do they need to learn? They'll decide that, and then there'll be some research, and it's iterative. They understand what's missing, they learn it, and then they continue to use that to shape the outcomes. Finally, those research findings will be presented, and it's the job of the strategist to write the brief. The brief gets presented to the marketer. It gets aligned on. The team has to agree that these are actually the goals that we've taken and synthesized appropriately. That the strategist will then take that brief the creative team with the marketer's approval. And it's really important that you inspire them while you brief them. You can't simply say the work has to do this, go do it. You have to help them think it through. Talk to them about what real people think so that that briefing is really motivating. And then your data teams will be there to reinforce what you've actually learned. And then the work based on the brief, the work will be evaluated against that. We will understand whether or not that work is truly on brief. And you never show work without re-looking at that brief and figuring out if it actually speaks to it. And the worst thing A client can say to a strategist, is this work is off brief? So it is the job of the strategist to really stick with those hypotheses that they had and make sure that the work delivers against it.
Nice.
There are lots of ways to do it poorly, right? Sometimes clients just say, it's just what we did last time. So I find this comic amusing because the one thing you don't want to do is just do everything you've done before. The other thing you don't want to do is dictate what the work looks like. I always say to clients, I have a vision of what some creative work might be when I write a brief, but if the only work that comes out of the brief is the work that I envision, then that's not a brief anymore. Then that's an outline. Then that no longer is the inspirational document that we're going for here. So dictating what goes in isn't going to help you. Instead, what will help you is to tell a story. I know that none of us who are in this business can explain to our mothers what we do, but your mother should be able to understand that there was a problem, that the communications had to address that problem, that there was a key thought or strategic idea that made you think this was going to be great work. And what did we learn? What insights got you there? What makes you think that's going to work? And if you can do that, you've got a brief. Interestingly, I always find it amusing that people, when they look at ads, don't stop and say, what do you think the brief was? But I would encourage you all to do that, because it's sometimes difficult, sometimes it's obvious. And I call that work where your brief is showing, right? Your strategy is showing a little too direct, but fundamentally the work to the brief has to be seamless. Okay. I say stimulate creativity. What does that mean? Well, a creative person doesn't want you to say, make me an ad with a pack shot in the fourth frame. They want to understand that there's a little piece of information that people that love this brand really feel this particular thing is what makes them tick. Those kinds of sparks or insights are really helpful, and it can come from anywhere. Maybe it's in the product. Maybe it's in the target audience. Maybe it's in the lovers of the brand. Maybe it's just the way the brand has always spoken. And of course, in the world today, where culture is so important, it can come from external culture and how that brand interacts. And I really believe we can't say enough, the inspiration needs to be there. I teach planners all the time. You don't email the brief, or in the days when we worked in person, you don't simply slip it under the door. You need to present that brief. This is your work as a strategist, and you need to engage and inspire your clients to see the vision that you have in that brief. And then that brief goes to the people that are going to make it happen. And the idea here is that they need to come up with something creative, something that hasn't necessarily been done in exactly the same way before. The relationship between the brand, product, and people is usually where the beauty of great ads come from. So I like to give these examples. One brief that's not inspiring is paint the ceiling. It might be open-ended, but it sure doesn't help me think what it could be. I could say paint it using red, green, and yellow, but then probably it would look like a stoplight. Also not very inspiring. But what people like to be asked is, we've got problems and we would be so grateful if you could cover up those problems. That's getting a little better because it tells them where to focus, right? None of these are particularly inspiring, but at least they're moving in maybe in the right direction. And on the next page, please paint our ceiling for the greater glory of God and as an inspiration and lesson to his people. They're telling you they need frescoes, not red, green, and yellow paint. And they're talking about insights and truths, the fall, mankind's degradation by sin, the divine wrath of the deluge. That's how that wall, that's how that ceiling became as wonderful as it is. So the idea here is people worry about being too dictatorial. The truth is, this is not dictatorial. This is inspirational. This offers up suggestions for how could this work be as wonderful and magnificent as it is. So In real life, you're not going to get a brief about the Sistine Chapel, but you will get a brief that will have some version of these 6 questions in it. And whatever agency or team you work with, their template might be different, but fundamentally, you can expect to see these questions on your brief. What do we want the advertising to do? To whom do we want to communicate, right? Who's being addressed? What do we want to say? What's the benefit of the product? What do we think is the idea that this can really leverage? And what are the specific message points that we want to make? And then if we're making a claim, why should people believe us? What's the evidence that we do this? How can we demonstrate that? What do we want people to think, feel, or do? What kind of desired response do we want? And lately, a lot of the briefs have, how will we be measuring that we have achieved that desired response? So KPIs, or key performance indicators, are finding their ways onto briefs. And then what are the tonal and practical considerations? Does the brand already have an essence or personality? Does it already stand for something? Is there a tagline or past ad? Are you in campaign that's already been there? And do we need to refresh, or are we starting from scratch? Those kinds of requirements and considerations are there. So if you get a form that looks peculiar to you, think about how you can make it mean these different things. It can be organized by these different topics so that you actually know what it is you're trying to accomplish. I mean, the questions here, and we talked about these, and they all have definitions, but you want to try to find a way to inspire creative people. You don't simply want to say mothers who are 25 to 40 years old. What you want to do is talk about the challenges of living that life. What are the insights that we know about people? How can we make the facts of this brief inspirational? And that's the art of the brief. And while I never take credit for the creative work that comes out, most great creative people will tell you if the brief was inspiring, they could do better work. You know, it is very important to understand that you simply can't lecture, that you need to present your work reflective of certain kinds of attributes, and that work will be better. So tone of voice matters, right? Brand personality matters. And those words, excuse me, should be deliberate, and they should be inspiring. They should be stronger. Think about the difference between kind and then something like heroic. It's much more interesting work can come if you've got a personality that is more interesting to talk to. What kind of person would you rather speak to? Excuse me. So it's not simple. It's not your first draft. I say that to people all the time. The first draft gets you started, but you need to go further. It takes work. Look everywhere. Client expertise. Talk to experts. Your own personal experience or the research that you've observed. Try competitive products. Come in with a point of view. Think about what competitive advertising is doing. And also think about what's happening for your brand in other markets. Sometimes you can learn a lot from that. The more concrete, the better. The more ideas, the better. So the essence of the East is a better thing to brief with than a beautiful cruise experience, just like Michelangelo needed to know about the greater glory of God. A private moment is better than saying a simple, indulgent cookie experience, right? The idea that the particular cookie transports you or transforms you or is something you save for yourself or treasure for yourself can send creative people into very, very interesting places. And I have a particular hate against too much jargon. Things like the core consumer mindset and the paradox between fulfillment and obligation to act is not as interesting as telling people that people really care about something and telling them in a way that they can understand. And none of my briefs ever have the word synergy. I don't know about you, Mark. None of my briefs have human language, because I think we're writing for human beings and we can help our teams by keeping them away from these kind of marketing jargon that some people think makes them sound smart. I would argue it just makes them sound confusing. Okay, so things to do. Align in advance. Talk to your creative director. He or she might have a vision. There might be something they've been playing with. You don't know when they get their brainstorms. And in the middle of the night, they might have thought of something, and there may be something in that. So align in advance on what you think needs to be there and where they're coming from. Make sure there's enough time. You never have enough time to do the brief, but you always have enough time to rewrite the work when it wasn't right to begin with. And if you had a better direction, you could really have gotten there the first time. Workshop the brief. I do this a lot. Don't come to clients with your email and say, well, we're not emailing, but don't come to clients with your brief all filled out and fill it in. Show them some alternatives. Talk about why one thing is better than the other. We already talked about doing it in person or at least over Zoom, not by email. And finally, make sure you're giving people enough to know. Sometimes creative people want to understand why the brand is having a problem. It might not be in your brief, but there's contextual information that can really help them internalize what it is you're trying to say. Don't cheat the time. Don't just list a whole bunch of reasons to believe. Don't think you're getting paid by the word. And don't expect the brief to resolve unresolved issues. If you and your client and your creative person and creative team are not aligned, you will misconnect when you bring work. And that's something we want to avoid. So what are the principles? Clarity, brevity, and fertility. No marketing jargon. Be clear, real people language. Literally be brief. Get to the point. Sure, if they ask you questions, you can come back, but you can't bury them in too much detail. You have to help them see where you think the gist of it is. And finally, a lot of ideas should come from a brief, not just one. If there's only one way to take it, then it isn't going to drive the greatest creativity. You're going to look at briefs in this class. I think some of us will discuss them with you, and we look forward to that.
Belle, thank you as usual. Brilliant. I loved it. And looking forward, Belle and I will be seeing you shortly, I think. So we look forward to seeing you all in class.
Yeah,
so
you
thank
can
you
see
all.
we're the same in class and on Zoom.
There you go. So thank you all. That was excellent. Thank you, Belle.
Talk to you.
Bye-bye.